Okay, so as I said, this is going to be a 40S sample final project. And what I'm going to do is we're going to start, and I'm just going to show you that on the 30S page right now, at the top is the two videos from 30S that, there we go, that show how I built the 30S project that way. And as well, what I'm going to do to suggest here for the 40S is we're going to start by downloading that 30S project, which I'm going to do here. I'm going to download that. So that's a starting point for the 40S project. On the 40S page, I'll be putting today's video and tomorrow's video. You never know, I could get this all done today on the website as well, so you can have those as well should you want to use this as part of your project. All right, so I'm going to open what I just downloaded, and I'm going to take this sample project, the 30S one, and I'm going to move that to my desktop. So there it is. I'm then going to go into NetBeans, and I'm going to open that project. So before I do, you'll notice I have nothing open here other than the 40S example that we've been working on all year, because we're going to take pieces of that as well. So everything from the 40S example, which you should have from this course, including the collections unit, which we did since winter break, that can get updated there. So anyways, I'm going to go to my desktop, and there's that sample 30S project. Open it. Okay, so right now it says Final Project Computer Science 30S. Let's change that. This is now going to be a 40S sample project. So I'm going to right click on it, and I'm going to rename it. When I rename it, I'm also going to check off this box so it renames the folder as well. And I'm going to rename it Computer Science 40S. And you'll notice on my desktop now it's been renamed. It doesn't say 30S Master anymore. So now I've got that as a starting point. Everything that I did over the last 2 days in 30S has now been renamed here. So I'm going to rename two more things that say 30S right now. One is the package, and one is the actual class. I'm going to start with the class. For renaming a class, I recommend you go right-click on the class, go to Refactor, Rename. You can also use the keyboard shortcut Control-R to rename a class. Okay, so I'm just going to change the 40S or 30S to 40S. This is also a good checkbox to have, because if you have a comment that talks about 30S, it'll rename the comment as well. There we go. Now, before I rename this package, since this is a 40S sample project, I'm going to make a few different packages. Packages isn't really part of the 30S course, but it's definitely part of the 40S course. So I'm going to make a new Java package. Since we'll be using something from our collections unit, I'm going to make a collections package. There'll be empty packages for now, but we'll be filling them in a second. Okay? But I'm going to make some other packages as well. I'm going to make one called Tools. I'm going to make one, okay, called Data. And I'm going to make a couple more. One called Controllers, and one called View. Okay, so these are new packages: collections, controllers, data, tools, and view. And then finally, I'm going to rename this one that says 30S. I'm going to right-click, refactor, rename, Final Project 40S. Okay. So one of the first things I'm going to do is I'm going to move some of these classes out of this package and into more appropriate packages, right? So for example, dialogues, numbers, and text. Those are all tools. They're all tools that are used in this program. So I'm going to just drag them over to tools. Once this little screen comes up, I'm going to refactor my code so that what the refactoring process does is it changes the code in case there's any line in there, specifically lines that say like package up here, it rewrites that line for you, so it makes for less work. Okay? So now those three classes, dialogues, numbers, and text, are in the tools package. Okay? For the view, okay, for that, I'm going to move the login UI into view. Okay, login UI is going to get moved into this view package. This is actually something we didn't have time to cover in the 40S course, but in computer science, in software development, there's what are called design paradigms, or different styles of designing larger applications. And one of them, sort of a traditional one, is called the MVC model, or the model view controller paradigm. It's kind of out of date now, and it is related a little bit maybe more to web development, but I'm not doing that one, but I'm doing a modification of that. So the view means this user interface is what the user views. Okay? To the data class, I'm going to move globals, person, and user. These three classes are really just used to store data, right? They don't display anything. They're used as a data structure. So I'm going to move those over to the data package and refactor them. Okay? And this one stays where it is. Now, these two are initially empty. We're going to change that in a minute, but they're initially empty. All right. So that was the first thing. We haven't really done anything at this point. It's all here. If I actually try to run it, it should still run because it's the 30S code and it works just fine. But we've shifted it around, renamed a few things, added some packages. All right, so that's part one, is adding those packages. Next thing we're going to do is this person class that is inside of the data package. It's from the 30S course. It's an example from the 30S course. So we're going to delete it. Right click, delete. Now that's going to cause a problem because the user class extends from the person class. It uses inheritance. But good news, we made a person class in the 40S course. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go into our code from Computer Science 40S, where we have all the code that we used. And in testing.advanced classes, if you look through it, you should find a person class right here that we built in the Computer Science 40S course. So we're going to use that one because it's more appropriate to this example. So I'm going to right click, I'm going to copy it. I'm going to go down to data, I'm going to right click, I'm going to paste. And when you copy and paste classes from one project to another, the refactor copy option comes up. Because again, what it does is it not only copies and pastes the class, but it modifies code to make sure that it lines up with your new project. So right click, paste, refactor copy. Person. So now the person class has been added. Okay? And we got to change one thing about the class. There's one error on this class. And you can see an error in NetBeans by seeing this little red line here. That indicates that that's the spot where an error in this class is occurring. And the error is right at the end. A method we used in the advanced classes unit to consume food, one of our abstract classes, well, unless we bring the food class over to this new project, this is generating an error. So we have two options. We could bring the food class over, or we could just delete this method. We're going to take the simpler route. We're just going to delete this method. We don't need it. Okay? Now, yeah, there's other methods we don't need as well, like this one here, end the world, which was just part of our learning in that unit. But it's not causing an error in the program, so I'm just going to leave that one alone, keeping it as simple as possible. So now the person class is the 40S version of the person class. Okay? So it's a little more of an advanced type thing, something that was the point of this sample project. Okay, so we've transferred over the person class. Okay? The other thing I'm going to do with this person class is, in order to use a specific mastery factor, I'm going to make this person class abstract. Okay? It's now going to be an abstract class, which means you can't create a person object. This generated another error down here in the clone method, okay? Because now we can't clone a new person because we can't instantiate a new person, okay? The reason I'm making it abstract is we're only using the person class to act as a parent for the user class. So it also not only uses the mastery factor, but it makes use of something that, there isn't really a person in the world. There's instances of the person. So to fix this, we're going to, again, take the simple action here and just delete the clone method. Okay, just wipe it out, and then it's not an issue. And now we fix that error. Okay, so we deleted that clone method. Okay, and again, if you use the 30s person, you wouldn't have had to worry about all that stuff, but your code would have stayed at that 30s level and not address some of the mastery factors of the 40s course, which is the point. Okay, so that's done. Okay, now with that done, we now can focus on this sample final project. We won't really need our, I'm going to close it. Oops, I think actually I closed it too soon. My apologies. Before we close Computer Science 40S, there is something else we need from it. We need the stuff for collections. So from your Computer Science 40S collections package, we're going to need these two classes, linked list and node. We're going to copy them and we're going to paste them. When we paste them, and yes, you can use Control-C, Control-V, make sure you refactor the paste so that it modifies any code that's getting pasted over. Now I have a linked list and a node class in my sample project, and that's a huge thing. That's going to be something that's going to be used to replace the array that's used at the 30s level. Okay, now I'm going to close the Computer Science 40S example. I don't need it anymore. I know you guys don't need to close it, but I just want to show you that the only project I have open now is this one here. Now what about this? Well, that's going to be a new class we're going to make today or tomorrow. Is going to go into that one. But for now, we're at least set up with the stuff we need so far. Okay, here's the next thing we're going to do. We're going to open up the user class. Okay, and let me just close the other ones. Okay, so this user class was made in the 30s example over the last 2 days. It's a pretty simple class. It extends person. It has a password hidden within it, okay, as you would imagine would be needed. But it had a method called info that returns the name. What I want to do with that method info is incorporate a 40s concept. I'm going to rename this method to what you guys are more comfortable with in the 40s course, the toString method. But rather than just type in a new name right here, I want to make sure that I rename not only here where the method is defined, but also all the places where the method is called. So I'm going to use the keyboard command Control-R to rename. This is something that is on the keyboard shortcuts card. You might remember the things you can use Java for. And Control-R is outlined as just rename, but it's a powerful rename. It actually goes through all the project to do this. So Control-R, whoops, to rename info toString, okay? I'm renaming it to the toString method. Notice it will rename my comments, it will refactor it. It did it, okay? It did the now as well, this is now a override method, overriding from the object class. So don't forget, I'm not going to do it in this video, to modify your comments, right, to more appropriately reflect the code we're changing. Now as well, the is_equal_to method was one written at the 30s level. I'm going to select it, Control-R, and I'm going to make this just equals, again, to match up with what's in the object class. Refactor it, and then I'm going to also, with the equals method, to make it the proper equals method, I'm going to make this parameter object. Okay? That will now make this a override method. And we got to add a line to the equals method now. We have to say user equals cast as a user that object. Now, this code might look familiar to you because we did this in the 40S Advanced Classes unit a few times to do this. If this doesn't look familiar to you, then maybe you weren't paying attention when we did it at that point. So this is casting it into that. Let me just put the comment in. I'm casting the object from the object class into a user object. So it's not a generic object anymore. It is now of type user. And then the rest of the code is the same, the stuff from the 30S, right? Getting the name, right? And checking the password and all that. That can stay the same, okay? We're going to do one more thing in the user class. We're going to, in the user class, make a public string get password method. It's one line, return the password. In the 30S course, I talked about how password was private and there wasn't a lot you could do with it. But you guys now know in the 40S that this is an example of an accessor method for the private, otherwise known as encapsulated property of this class. So password is private, but we are creating a accessor method, not a mutator method, just an accessor method to access the password if we need it, okay? So that is a modification now to the user class. Okay, how are we on time? 11:14, I've only gone not even 15 minutes yet. Okay, so here's what we've done so far. We've copied the 30S project, added packages to it, moved over a few classes from our 40S example and copied and pasted them into this project, and made changes to the user class so that it kind of lines up with our 40S content. Okay? Okay, here's what we're going to do now. We're going to go into this controllers package and we're going to add a class called Logincontroller. So right click, new Java class, capital L, login, capital C, controller. Okay, Logincontroller. Again, what I'm doing here is I'm separating out the code that does stuff, the logic, from the design of this user interface. This is something that's done in Visual Studio. Visual Studio has separate code files for the design and separate code files for your logic. And this is a more sort of professional paradigm for doing this. So anyways, I'm going to hit finish. All right. We're going to delete most of the methods except the constructor. We can keep the constructor. We're going to need it. Okay. This is a Logincontroller. It's going to be connected to, so I might as well open up the login user interface. Okay. Which I'm actually, I guess you could rename that. Maybe I won't. You could rename that login view. Okay. Because it's what the user views. And then there's the login, what does the controlling. But I'm going to leave it as UI. I think that's still a good name. Okay, and I'm going to go to the source code of login UI. So the first thing I'm going to do in the source code is I'm going to create a connection by making a private login controller, okay, which I have to import from my controllers package, and I'm just going to call it controller. Okay, equals a new, no, I'm not going to do that yet. I'm not going to make a new one yet. I'm just going to create a reference to what will be a Logincontroller. Okay, now here's where it gets interesting. When the login UI is built, okay, that's where we connect it. So what I'm going to do is after init components, which is the method that's written by NetBeans is called, okay, I'm going to say controller equals new login controller. And rather than just use the default constructor, I'm going to pass it the stuff I want the controller to be able to control. So I'm going to pass it this, which is the entire JFrame. But I'm also going to pass it the specific things that the JFrame needs to control. It doesn't need to control everything here. It needs to control the two text boxes, because I'll be pulling text out of them. And it needs to control the list box, because I'll be adding stuff to the list box. So that's what I'm going to pass it. J text field 1, comma, J text field 2, comma, list 1. Those are the things I need to control. So I don't have this constructor, but I can use my light bulb to create that constructor over in that other class. Now, before I go over and look at that constructor I just put together, okay, I'm going to take these lines of code that were from the 30S course, and I'm going to cut them so they're sitting in my computer's memory right now. I just cut them. Now I'm going to jump over to this new constructor. I'm going to just add some breaks here so we don't have to look at it all scrolled across the screen. There we go. There's that new constructor right there. And I'm going to paste in that code I just cut. It'll generate an error, but we'll fix that in a minute. And now I can get rid of the default constructor. I don't need that anymore. Okay, I have a new constructor for this login controller. Okay. Whew, taking a breather here. I'm going to rename some of these parameters. This was my login UI. This text field here was where the name text box was. Actually, I'll just call it name text. This one was the password text. This one, instead of list 1, I'm just going to call it list. Okay? That's what I've renamed these parameters, which now means instead of this, I can say login UI, set resizable, set location, set visible. This now makes a lot more sense because when the login controller is built, now it can control login UI. Let's see if it still does that. Does it still set it to the center of the screen? Absolutely it does. So it does everything it was doing before, just now being done in a different class, this controller class. Now as well, I'm going to need these things, these 4 things, maybe in different places throughout the code. So I'm going to make them also global variables. Little copy paste, add the semicolons to the end of these lines instead of a comma. Add a semicolon to the end here. Also put the word private in front of these to keep them encapsulated. Okay, so now they're global variables to this class. But how could I connect the parameters to these? Well, this is again where I can use code like this dot login UI equals login UI. And I can do that for all of these things. I can do it for the name text, the password text, and the list. Okay, so I'm just creating a connection between the view, okay, and the controller. Okay, so there is the connection. We're going to be coming back to this login controller in a minute. But now we have a login controller connected to our login UI. These two things are connected together so that they kind of can do what one thing can do, the other thing can do. And it's going to make our life actually a lot easier. And I'm going to show you why. We're going to go back to login UI. You now see that some of the code has been shifted over. Well, if I scroll down, I'm now going to shift all the code from this button. So I'm going to select all this button code, and I'm going to cut it. So it's sitting in my memory right now. And then I'm going to say controller.add, because that's what this button was supposed to do. It's supposed to add a new user. But I don't have that method yet. But I'm going to use the light bulb to create the method add over in the controller class. Holding down the control key on my keyboard, I can click on it to jump to it. And then I just hit paste. And it pastes in all the code I had copied over. Now, there is some change I have to do. I have to rename, Control R. Oh, I'm going to rename, that won't work, JTextField1 as name text. So just in a couple places, this is now password text. This one is name text. This one is password text. This one is name text. And list one, I just changed the name to just list. So I just fix those things that are now renamed in this class, right? So that's add. All the logic has been shifted over to the controller. Let's do the same with JButton 2. I'm going to select all the code that's in that button. I'm going to cut it, not copy it, cut it. Controller dot, this button was to delete a user. Use the light bulb, create the method, jump to the method, paste in the code, change a few names so that it lines up. And now all the logic to delete a user has been shifted over to the controller class. So this is, I'm putting this on the video again, just as an example of kind of at a 40S level, you should be able to manage code a little bit differently than you can manage code at a 30S level. And I know I'm going pretty quick here, so that's why, again, I'm sort of recording this on the video. The idea being you can always go, if you're using the video, you can pause it and rewind it to places where it makes a little more sense. So there's the delete code shifted over to the controller class. Now I'm going to do JButton 3, which is the login button. Cut it, controller.login, assuming that method's there, then creating that method, jumping to that method, pasting in that code. Okay? Now, when I pasted that code, the problem now is it calls a custom method. Well, that custom method is over here in Login UI. Well, all I got to do is take that custom method and cut it and paste it over now in the controller. So the same method can be used in one class as in another. So what that means is now this user interface has very little of our code in it. All it does is create a controller, instantiate it, and then it calls methods from that controller. None of the logic now sits in what this designer code is. Okay? All the logic now sits in the controller class, but it still works the same way. Okay, I'm going to go for 5 more minutes to get a little more done there. That was a big piece of code, though. It was shifting all that logic over from one class over to another. Okay? All right, the next big thing we're going to do is we're now going to go into the globals class. Because in the globals class, at the 30S level, we use an array of users. Okay? At the 40S level, we know something that's a little better than an array that is a more dynamic data structure, and that's a linked list. So we're going to change this line here to incorporate a linked list, which means we won't actually need this index variable anymore. Now, the second we start changing the globals class, it's going to break some of our code over in the logic controller. So I'm going to try and get most of that done before I wrap up this video right now. All right, here's what we're going to do. Public static will stay the same, but now we're going to use a linked list. Now, when you import this linked list, make sure you import the one that we wrote, not the one from Java util. That one's a good one, but we want to demonstrate that we're using our own linked list, the one that we made. The type is user. It's a linked list of users. So that's the line, a linked list of users. You can now delete that index variable as well. When you hit save, you're going to notice that this will cause errors in the Logincontroller class, which we're going to go and fix. Okay, but that's the start of it. Now we jump back to Logincontrollers, and we'll start with the first error, which is right here, which is in our add method. Okay, this is how we added it to an array. How we're going to add it to a linked list is globals dot users dot add user. So this line here replaces this line here. Okay, that's how we add to a linked list or a collection data structure. We do not need this line to increase an index, so that reduces our code by a line because now the dynamic data structure is more efficient. So it took one line out of there worrying about an index variable. We just add it. Let's move to the next error. And again, I'm using this nice feature in NetBeans where it just shows you the errors here. All right, I'll just scroll down right here. We had to use the technique known as lazy deletion to remove it from an array because you can't really delete it from an array. But we can delete it, globals dot users dot delete or remove. We can remove it from a linked list. Now we can actually remove it based on the user or the index. We're going to use index here because that's how we removed it from the list, and now that's exactly how we remove it from our linked list. So it saved again a bunch of code, and more importantly, it saves a ton of memory because it's more efficient. So instead of having like a giant array full of nulls, our linked list will add and delete as needed. A couple more little errors down here in the use in database method. It's not dot length with our linked list, it's dot size, which is a method we wrote. Okay. Instead of this one, to access a spot in the linked list, we use dot get spot I. We get it out of the array that way. Also, there won't be any nulls anymore. So believe it or not, we can actually delete this if statement because there's never going to be a null. And we can backdent this one so that it makes it more efficient. There's not going to be nulls in a linked list, not the way we wrote it. Okay? And then we just check to see if they're equal. Hit save. That clears up the errors, and now we've shifted our logic from using an array to using a linked list. Let's just test it before we wrap up this video today. Okay, we got a bug. We got a bug in here where the Logincontroller adding a user was a problem. And I think that's an easy bug to fix. We never instantiated this, so equals new linked list using the diamond constructor. Okay, so saving it. Let me just stop it and run it again. Hopefully that will fix the error. Absolutely. Still works now with a linked list rather than an array. All right, stay tuned for part 2 tomorrow.